It's what I didn't miss.
Ghost in the garden. There's a ghost in my garden. I nod to him in the spring as I till the dark, fertile soil, so foreign among the clay-dominated ground all around. I shake my head at him in the summer as I hack away at the mysterious and stubborn and unkillable root reappearing in the southwest corner. If a cockroach was a plant, this would be its root, and I blame it on the ghost. I tip my cap to him in the fall as the last of the season's harvest comes in, aided by the perfectly placed plot in the only sunlit corner of the otherwise wooded yard. Here's to you, Herman. You've haunted this place well. The other day, one of my neighbors knocked at my back gate and entered to find me weeding the zucchini alongside two of my children. She smiled. Herman would be so pleased if he could see this. Herman, you see, isn't a figment of my imagination. Even though I don't believe in actual ghosts per se, his presence is definitively real. Herman was the man who built this house for his own family, who planted the trees, laid out the garden, trucked in the dark soil, and lived a full life here, long before I ever laid eyes on the for sale sign in front of the finally empty house. My family and I never met Herman, but we are well aware that he came before us here. My children know him as Mr. K, a sign of respect for someone who was born some 8 decades before they were, and who unknowingly created a home not just for his own family, but for ours as well. We've learned bits and pieces of his personal story through neighbors, but we notice his presence from what he left here. The perennials that surprise us with their vibrant colors and beauty in the spring, his clear preference for oak trees, the mysterious heart-shaped rock patterns by the fence, the homemade tree houses and feeder, the garden so long and wide and perfectly protected from hungry rabbits and deer. Truth be told, we fell in love with this place for the yard, not the house, and the yard has Herman's fingerprints all over it. I'm sure that Herman left a larger legacy with his own family, but we are grateful for what he left for us as well, and we look forward to adding to it. So, Herman's the ghost in my garden, but he's hardly alone. As I grow older, I find that there are ghosts around many corners. In the shed at the back of the yard is an old pitchfork. I have another and newer pitchfork in there as well, but this one comes with a 30-year-old image of a middle-aged man in a faded blue tank top leaned over it. Pants pulled a little too tight up around his waist, sweat trickling over his brow, a small red tractor in the horizon behind him, and the smell of freshly spread manure in the air. My father is still with us at 85, but he lives 8 hours to the south, and I sometimes choose this pitchfork to bridge that distance for a time. A shed, it turns out, is good for ghosting. My wife's uncle from Montreal recently spent some time with us, and he seemed determined to add things to our shed whenever it struck his fancy. A built-himself shelving unit that brought organization to a crowded space. Some nifty power tools that are handy to have but hard to justify in a tight family budget. A deluxe tool belt that will likely never be justified by the small project that I'm qualified to pull off. It was a little unsettling for a while when he kept adding things of his own volition. I'm convinced that on most days my shed is now better stocked than my fridge. But I think I finally figured out why his man-on-a-mission activity made him so happy while he was visiting. He wanted to leave something tangible behind. He wants to be a ghost in my shed, even after he's gone. Ghosting, of course, isn't limited to tangible items. My wife often tells our children that she wants them to hear her voice in their head, even when she's not with them. Her voice can help them to discern the right choice, even when they're on their own. This is ghosting too, I suppose, although as our children grow older and more mature, we hope that the words of conscience in their head will be in their own voices, and not ours. Voices are important, however. I still hear my late mother's voice from time to time, though thankfully not from an "I'm watching you, young man" type of perspective. My oldest son recently gave his profession of faith in church, and when that first communion plate headed our way that Sunday, I realized that with my wife in the choir, any parental words of wisdom would have to come from me. Or so I thought. I leaned over and began to whisper to him about the significance of this ritual and how to prayerfully prepare your heart and mind for it each and every time. I paused for a second when I realized that I was sitting in 2 different churches at the same moment. In one, I was looking up at my mother in the exact same circumstance, 3 decades prior, and a couple of pitchforks to the north and the west. And in the other, I was looking down at my firstborn son and repeating my mother's advice nearly word for word. As I bowed my head in both churches, the grown man version of me longed to catch my mother's eye in that other pew and say, "Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Mom." When that same firstborn son was a baby, I used to sing a little made-up song for him when he was hurt or scared or needed consoling. It was a simple little ditty that I called the Buddy Bay Song, and though it was so simple that to call it a song is a disservice to ballads everywhere, it seemed to serve its purpose, and I sang it to my next two sons as well. A few years later, we were in a minivan, and my youngest daughter was having a rough time. She had only recently come home from China, and traveling was new and difficult for her. We were on a major road and couldn't stop, and there was very little my wife and I could do from the front, and nothing we tried was working. We were frustrated and on edge and looking for a chance to pull over. And then suddenly the screaming subsided and I could actually hear myself think again. I glanced back to see what had calmed my inconsolable daughter. My three boys, each under the age of 8, each straining against their seatbelts and toward their little sister, each paying no attention whatsoever to their hapless parents in the front, were each harmonizing a simple little chorus together to their suddenly wide-eyed and silent sister. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay, my Buddy Bay. It was my song in my children's voices, and it never sounded better. I joined in quietly from the front, a background vocal to lend my presence, but not to take over their own special effort. Today, that memory makes me smile, and it gives me hope for the future, even the distant future. I may or may not be the ghost in my own children's future gardens, but I'll be there somewhere, if only in the background. I hope I haunt them well.